The old man had just pulled down his trousers. The Nazis recognized him instantly as a Jew. The only thing that awaited him was to be shot. The boy saw this in the crowd. He took off his red scarf and destroyed his papers. When the Nazis came to question him, he began with his fluent German. He lied about being German. Then he said his parents were dead. He'd been placed in an orphanage. The boy looked at him and said he was glad to have escaped. With a smile of gratitude on his face, the Nazi soldiers were confused. To make sure the boy was one of them, the soldier took him to see the officer. The boy remained unperturbed. The boy remained calm. He didn't go on with his pathetic story, but the officer suddenly asked him the names of his parents. He was stunned, because he didn't know much about German surnames, and he didn't have time to make them up. The officer saw that the boy was hesitant to speak, and realized what was happening. He began to feel sorry for the boy.
Mein Gott, hat doch gesagt, dass im Waisenhaus war. Bestimmt haben die Bolschewiken seine Eltern auf dem Gewissen.
There was a commotion not far from here. That's when the commotion got our attention. Several Soviet soldiers refused to be inspected, and because of the language barrier, an argument broke out. The boy, who knew Russian, was called in to translate. Unexpectedly, one of the Soviet officers was Stalin's son. The Nazis were baffled. They could not do anything about it. The Soviet officer asked the boy where he learnt Russian. The boy said he had been a member of the Soviet Komsomol. The officer spat at him in contempt. When the Nazi officer saw this, he immediately came to the boy's defense.
Wenn einen Deutschen beleidigt, kann ganz schnell eine Kugel verpasst kriegen.
Stalin's son became a Nazi trophy. They were happy to have the boy photographed. They said the boy had brought them good luck. Then the boy was taken to the command post. He took food from the soldiers. He took a bite and suddenly, someone behind him called out his real name. It was the same man who had wronged him at school. He pointed at the boy and told him he was a Jew. But the Nazi didn't understand and asked the boy to translate. The boy said that he was accusing him of being a Jew, and he didn't know him. He went over and slapped his enemy in the face. This simple, brutal approach won the favor of the Nazi, and the wrongdoer jumped over the fence to teach the boy a lesson. The Nazis stopped him. The Nazis blocked the way. In the chase, the wrongdoer was executed on the spot, and so the boy joined the Nazis. On the march, the only time he dared go to the toilet was when his mates were resting, and each time, he had to run a long way. Jews were circumcised as children, so it was easy to tell the difference. That day he was hiding in the woods. Halfway through a meal, two soldiers ran up to him and said the colonel wanted to see him. The soldiers were genuinely happy for the boy and gave him a dressing down. He told him not to speak out of turn. The colonel looked at the boy and saw that he was not hiding anything. The colonel looked at the boy and asked him who was the enemy of Germany. Without hesitation, the boy answered the Soviet Union, but the officer shook his head.
Nein, mein Junge, diesen Krieg führen wir gegen die Juden.
The boy's eyes were terrified. He couldn't even breathe. Afterwards, the boy was sent on a sweep. He happened to be passing by a Jewish house. The boy's grief at the murder of his countrymen was too much to bear. The Nazis beside him told him that it was the same Jews who had killed his family, so that he wouldn't be exposed. He fires his machine gun and made a gesture of hatred. The boy was confused. How could these Germans could be so kind to themselves and at the same time be cruel to others? The Nazis captured a Soviet radio. The boy holds the phone and translates for the soldiers. The Soviets say they've got a German bastard in their sights. As soon as he speaks, a soldier falls to the ground. In an instant, the boy was the only one left on the ground. In order to survive, he had a flash of insight and dialed up the Soviet radio. He claimed he was a Nazi, and that he had retaken the position. They praised him for his bravery. He and the boy agreed on a rendezvous code. Night fell. The boy could not wait to get to the Soviet position. The Jewish boy ran into the Nazis and ran towards the Soviet positions. Just as he was surrendering with his hands in the air, the Soviets on the other side followed his example. They threw down their weapons. The boy was baffled. Behind him, a large number of Nazi soldiers suddenly rushed out. The Nazis saw the boy. They thought he was going to attack the enemy camp alone. They were inspired. They followed him and charged the Soviets. The Nazis celebrated by abandoning the boy. A Jew had become a Nazi hero. When the colonel heard about it, He took a liking to the boy. He even adopted him as his son. He sent him to an aristocratic school. He was seen as the future of Germany's elite. His instructors called him a hero who had returned from the war. With such a track record, the students couldn't help but respect the boy. Under the guidance of the instructors and the attention of his classmates, he was forced to swear an oath of allegiance to the Führer. He was forced to swear an oath of allegiance to the Führer. There was a lot of hatred for the Jews. Even the school song was sung, "A long knife into a Jew's body." The boy's face was ugly. Perhaps it was even more dangerous than the front line. The students were usually very friendly, but the boy was cautious. He double-checked the lock on the bathroom door. In the school's armed swimming competition, the boy won easily. He became the man of the hour. But in culture class, he was on pins and needles, because the subject of the lesson was exactly how to spot a Jew in a crowd. The teacher thought the Jews looked strange: bald heads, guttural noses, pointy ears, and no back of the head. They walked like apes, they have cunning eyes and exaggerated limbs, and they're very good at playing the poor guy. The teacher called the boy forward to show him the best of the Germanic genes. The boy was apprehensive, but he couldn't refuse. The boy was nervous, but he couldn't refuse. There were calipers and color plates. He was very nervous, but in the end, the teacher came to the conclusion, although the boy's ancestors were of mixed race, he was still a noble Aryan. Soon the news of the Nazi defeat at Stalingrad. At Stalingrad, the students were crying. The boy pretended to cry, too. School life went on. The class flower asked the boy out. He had a crush on the young hero. The two of them quickly established a relationship. Benihana wanted to go further, but the boy refused on the pretext that he was afraid of being exposed. Banana didn't care. The two chased each other all the way. They came to a Jewish cemetery. Here, Bana made a rude remark. The boy couldn't hold back, so he slapped her.
Du hast mich geschlagen, um die Juden zu verteidigen? Niemand schlägt eine deutsche Frau ins Gesicht. Keiner.
To hide his identity better, the boy also had a small operation on himself. He sewed a thin thread to his lower body to hide his song, but with little success. The pain was so severe that he couldn't finish his training. That's when his classmates told him the sad news that he would soon have a medical examination. The Jewish boy who tried to survive the Nazis. To survive the Nazis, he had the heart to cover his circumcision, to hide his circumcision. The pain was so severe that he couldn't train properly. Even getting up at night was difficult. But it wasn't all bad. He learned from his classmates. He learned from his classmates that he had to undergo a medical examination soon, and he had to take off his shorts. The boy in a hurry pretended to have a toothache and fled the scene, at the expense of his own good teeth. The next assassination training. The boy looked at the doll's chest, the 6-star symbol of the Jews. He hesitated. This aroused the instructor's suspicion. He was called to the file room to check his identity. The boy pulls out an ID given to him by the Nazi colonel, and falsely claimed that his original papers had been left at the orphanage, and probably lost them in the war. The instructor's expression relaxes as he looks at the certificate from the military. His expression relaxes. He told the boy it was just a test. What the Reich and the Führer need. The Reich and the Führer need the best of the best like the boy. The boy had escaped for the moment. He came out of the archives worried. Suddenly, an ear-splitting siren sounded. A bomber flies in and drops several bombs. The school was in ruins. Naturally, the files are gone. The boy was relieved. The threat to his identity was gone. Soon after, the Soviets invaded Berlin. The students were forced to join the battlefield. The Nazis gave them the power to resist. The boy looked out the window at the Soviets, and hesitated to shoot. He hoped the Soviets would win, and let the Jews return to their homes. This time he deserted. He jumped into the Soviet position with his hands up. He shouted that he was a Jew, and that the Soviets were taking him away. But at the camp, the Soviet officer suspected that the boy was a spy from the other side. After all, none of the fleeing Jews were as fat and healthy as the boy. The officer took out photographs of the massacred Jews. He threw them at the boy one by one. Jews who infiltrated the Nazis. They never came back alive. Then the boy was taken to a group of Jews.
Możesz ją zastrzelić jak собаку.
They see that the boy is wearing a Nazi uniform. They raised their guns. Just then, someone behind him shouts the boy's name. The boy turns round and it's his own brother. The brothers cried tears of joy. They never thought that in this time of chaos, in this time of war and turmoil, they could still reunite their family after being separated for months. This is a miracle from God. When the war was over, the boy chose to join his brother, to go to Palestine, for the rest of his life. The story is based on the real-life experiences of a 13-year-old Jewish boy. In order to survive, to stay alive, he moved from camp to camp. He changed his identity several times, and even went against his beliefs. But in the end, he chose to return to his original self.